In this video we shall talk about database backup and restore operations. As all tasks here are connected to each other, let's list them all at once. So in the first task we have to create a command file that makes a database backup. In the second task we have to create a command file that restores a database from a backup. And in the third task we have to create a command file that makes a working copy of a database. It creates a backup and then restores that backup to a database with a different name. As the expected result for all tasks are command files themselves, let's look at those files. To make a database backup in MySQL we have to use MySQL dump utility. Here is the general approach and here is the same approach with samples. Here we have to call the MySQL dump utility and we have to tell it that we are working with ABC user, with DEF password, and we are going to backup this database into that file. And that's almost all. The only thing we have to mention is for that command to work from any point of your file system, you have to put the path to this utility in your system path variable. To achieve the same result in Microsoft SQL Server, we have to use SQL CMD utility. Once again, here is the general idea and here is the same idea with details. While calling this utility, we have to tell the DBMS our username, our password, our computer network name, our Microsoft SQL service name, and then we have to tell the utility that we are going to execute an SQL query. Here it is: backup database, database name to disk, and our backup file name. Please make sure that your backup name has this extension BAK, otherwise this process may fail. And of course, the path to this utility should be placed in your system path variable. To make a database backup in Oracle, we have to execute such a rather huge script. And like with two previous databases, here is the general idea, here is the same idea with samples. Here we have to use two utilities, SQL Plus and EXPDP. The first utility is needed to execute two queries with our database. In the first query we have to grant permissions to our user to create directories. Then this query, due to this symbol, is passed into SQL Plus utility, and that utility works with such user, such password on such a computer. Then in the next query we have to create a directory with such logical name and such physical name. And that query will also be passed to SQL Plus utility. And finally, to create the backup itself, we have to use EXPDP utility. Here we also have to pass our username, our password, and our computer network name. Then we have to list schemas, and in most cases it will only be one schema with the same name as the username is. Then we have to tell the utility to use that logical directory we've already created, and we only have to name the dump file for data and dump file for log of our database. Now let's restore our databases from their backups, and let's start with MySQL. Once again, here is the general idea and here is the same idea with samples. We have to use MySQL utility, and here we have to pass the username, the password, and the query to execute. This key tells the utility that the next parameter is a query to execute. As here we have to drop the old version of our database, please make sure that you are not dropping some useful working copy. Then we have to create a database with the same name and the same encodings as in that backup file. Then we have to call the utility once again, telling it to work with such a username, such a password, and to use that file as the data source for that database. To restore a database from a backup in Microsoft SQL Server, we may follow two approaches. The first approach is for a case when you have an SQL human readable backup. Then you only have to execute such a command. You have to call SQL CMD utility and you have to tell it to work with such a username, such a password on such a computer and with such a service name. And then you only have to specify the input file and you have to place the name of your backup file here. But in most cases with Microsoft SQL Server you'll have to use binary backups, and in the first task we were creating exactly the binary one. So here you have to call the same SQL-CMD utility with a username, a password, a computer name, a service name, and then you have to tell the utility that you want to execute an SQL query, and that query is restore database name from disk and your backup file name here. And once again make sure that your backup file has that BAK extension. To restore a database from a backup in Oracle, you have to execute such a script. You have to call AMPDP utility, you have to tell it the username, the password and the computer name. Then you have to tell it the schema name, usually it's the same as your username is. Then you have to specify that logical directory we've created in the first task. And then you have to specify file names for data backup and for log backup. To make a working copy of a database, first we have to create a backup and then we have to restore the backup with some different name. So for MySQL the approach is the next. First we have to export an existing database and that action was described in details in the first solution. And then we have to restore the backup of a database into a working database and that action was described in details in the second solution. The only difference from the second solution is that word copy here. So we are exporting our original database into a backup file, but then we are using that backup file to restore the data into the copy of our original database. With Microsoft SQL Server the idea is the same. First we have to export our database into a backup, and that was described in details in the first solution. Then we have to import our backup into a copy of a database, and that was described in the second solution in details. The only difference is that copy word here and also this expression that tells the DBMS to synchronize file names with database name. For Oracle, the general idea is the same. Once again, we have to export our database, and that idea was described in details in the first solution. Then we have to import our database from a backup, and that idea was described in details in the second solution. And the only difference here is that we have to make several preparations. We have to drop old table space, old user, recreate that table space, recreate that user, and grant privileges to that user. Now, as we've reviewed all the solutions, please pause the video and try executing such scripts in your system yourself.